Hi friends, my name is Host Eric and welcome to a very special episode of Talking with Fans People in which we discuss the topic of death and how it links to cognitive functions. As you can see, Rachel and I recently visited an old graveyard in Sierra Madre and I took some pictures of some gravestones. I thought it would be a perfect backdrop, but primarily this is motivated by the provision by Winston's mom to me of these wonderful little whiteboard paddles. So we're going to be discussing death from a past, present, and future perspective here in this video. However, let's go ahead and bring up the picture of it instead of showing the paddle like that. So what I'm basically going to get at here is that when we understand death through a frame of reference that is backwards looking, past looking, we're including map and experience. That is to say, our notations of what's happened and what those things have meant, and the realities of our particulars, namely that it was Joe who died and not Sue. In the present, we tend to be talking about death in terms of experience minus map, which is, for example, say there's a crevice you're going to jump over, and if you fall into it, it's certain death. But that map information is not very useful if the crevice is easy to jump over. When we're talking about the future, we're talking about map versus minus experience. So we haven't experienced the future yet, obviously, and yet we have visions of what our future relationship with death might look like regardless. And some of those are religious, like heaven and hell and stuff, but some of them are simply practical world things, and that's more the end I'm talking about here. Okay, so let's bring up the next slide, which isn't really a slide, but a picture of this here. Managing death. So, I would manage death, so to say, handle the discomfort implicit in the death of something or someone close to you by focusing on the present, which is to say, focusing on the future to some extent. People mistake it for being future focused. It's really present focused, but the present reveals information about the future when one looks at the present through an objective, non-experiential frame of reference. So NI might best be said to be that which ignores one's own experience in favor of what one intuits to be universally true. And you can see here, managing the past involves a couple of different strategies, namely like scrapbooking, keeping pictures of everything that's happened before, is something that an SI tool user like my dad might do. It's not an absolute value for him, it's an instrumental value, so he doesn't actually look at the pictures, but he sustains the records anyways and archives just by his sort of a way of going through life doing stuff. You could also blah, 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 tell stories about the past. Keep that past close by revisiting it often, and whether or not that's a good thing, it depends on who you ask. Some people may say, well, you're stuck in the past. Some people may say you're giving due respect to elements that were critical in your life from before. Usually those parties will split on SI-NI lines. And then last year we see a list of map updates. So we have conceptions of death from early on. Some of them range from, pictures of a long-bearded guy on a golden throne in the sky letting you in, to Jesus as portrayed in the various pictures, to other religious figures, Buddha, Muhammad, or whatever. Some people believe in reincarnation. These are all kinds of notions about what happens to the ego or the self after the body dies. But we also have conceptions of what our funeral is going to look like, what our parents' funerals are going to look like. And we probably got those from one of the two possible sources, basically. TV shows and movies that show a funeral, and you visualize something equivalent to what you've seen in those shows, or your own experience of a funeral, and you visualize something equivalent to those funerals you've been to. So the thing about this is there's a number of factors as to what your funeral is going to be like, or any given person's funeral is going to be like. And the number one important factor is age. For people who die in their 20s, they have massive funerals, and they have a lot of people show up, and they've got a lot of people involved in their larger social circles. As people get older, they spend less time socializing in general, and then as they get substantially older, then their friends all start dying. My dad did a good job of maintaining all of his friendships and relationships and stuff, but he still doesn't have a lot of people left, because they've largely died off. He didn't make connections necessarily with the younger generation. So, what is this getting us to here? Well, first let's look at this. This is real time, present, okay? You see this guy who's in purple. He's decided to jump over the canyon or death cavern. He's already on the other side of it before he looks back and goes, oh, geez, that sure was deep down there. Because the mapping part of things is going to say two questions here. Number one, if I fall in that crevice, am I going to die? If the answer is 100% yes, if I fall in that crevice, I'm going to die 100% yes. Then there's a separate question of, am I going to fail to jump over the crevice and fall into it? Now, let's say the crevice is just narrow enough for your body to actually fall down into it. Easy to jump over. Well, somebody who's dealing with this reality in the moment is going to not see this as a threat to death. If they're an SE type, for example, they're going to jump over it because they know they have zero chance of failing and falling into it. If you're, say, INFP or perhaps INTP, you may find yourself standing there and looking at it, even though you could easily enough jump over it with just a 100% guaranteed chance you're going to jump over it. The fact that it has a 100% certainty of killing you if you don't will make you pause. It's not an appropriate place to use the map because it's like the probabilities in this case, regardless, it equals 0% chance of you dying. You know what I'm saying? So an any type, though, is likely to muse about, well, is this really worth it? Let me think about what possible outcomes could occur here. And depending on how strong their any is and what other functions are in the mix, they could very well conclude that it's not worth the risk, even though there's zero risk. So there is a risk fallacy that people engage in all the time, which is if you inform them that there is a risk of something, they tend to factor that information into their decision-making metrics, even if you don't tell them anything about the likelihood of the risk. So it could be 0.000000001%, but once it's spoken of and addressed as a risk factor, and then people put way more attention towards addressing that risk factor than would be justified by the actual likelihood of it occurring. All right, so another way the cognitive functions deals with death, in this instance in the present. And now let's look at this. The rarely updated maps. This is the experience I had, the anecdote that prompted me to make this video and wanted to make this video. The other day, 2 days ago, I was taking a nap, lying down for a nap, and musing about whatever in my head. And I was imagining my father's funeral in rather morbid fashion. And it struck me that, I haven't updated my map of my dad's funeral in decades. In my mind's eye, I'm still picturing him or my mom dying and the funeral being well attended by work friends, people my mom taught with, my dad's buddies and stuff. Well, that's not the case. Almost everybody's dead, and it's going to be a very lightly attended funeral, I suspect. It's going to be me and Delilah and Rachel and maybe my dad's sister, maybe my cousins if they can travel out, and that's it. And that should be about it, really. That's the extent of my family. And my cousins aren't even biologically related to me because they were adopted by my dad's sister who couldn't have kids. So this caused me to experience existential terror, a sense that I have lost the past while I wasn't paying attention. These moments of rarely updated maps needing to be updated, realizing, oh shit, I'm still thinking like I'm 30 years old about meh, 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 meh. Or oh shit, I'm still thinking my parents are 65 years old. They just they're just moving into retirement and they're very active socially and they've got a lot of stuff going on. My mom's in a nursing home, unable to sustain any relationships beyond those that we do the sustaining work for her. And my dad is pretty good about staying in contact with the people he has left, Richard and Alan, his friends, and his sister and his sister's husband, in terms of family, and the Stoffers, who are more distant family. He started having video conferences with them and stuff, and that's great. It helps him stay engaged and so forth. But it doesn't change the fact that my vision of what their funeral was going to look like, either of my parents, was woefully out of date. And it was woefully out of date because, in some sense, I had been missing the ongoing changes, paying attention to other stuff that's more interesting to me, and then all of a sudden recognizing this map is totally out of date in a way that's tragic and horrifying and reminds me in stark resolve of humans' mortality. So, those are the 4 slides I made for this, and I would say that of that last thing I'm talking about, the existential terror part and the rarely updated maps, that's most likely going to bother somebody with 4th slot SI, maybe 5th slot SI, but 5th slot probably manifests as worrying that your past is going to be better than your future. But for me, the sort of almost core underlying fear I have is that important things will be lost while I'm not paying attention, and I won't even notice they're gone until years later. So, I'm sorry for the morbidity of the whole thing, but I think there were some interesting concepts, and I wanted to share these thoughts and also have a chance to use these whiteboard paddles that Winston's mom got me. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. Everybody dies eventually.